There we are. We're live. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the mic placement. I've been putzing around with my desk setup, and I thought that this would maybe the best position for the mic so I can see both the chat and my screen in front of me for the presentation purposes. Let me move the chat over now that we've gotten started. I can get this out of the way and pop you guys over so we can see. And there we have it. Welcome to Weather Center Live, guys. It is June 24th, 2024, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Quite a bit of up-and-comings that we're going to discuss tonight, and I want to go ahead and get this out there right from the jump start. If you're watching this currently and you're in the chat, or you're watching this after the fact, please give that like button a little nudge. Thank you very much for those of you who have already hit the like button, and thank you very much for whoever dropped that $5 donation in already. I didn't even notice that. And it doesn't say who dropped it in. As a matter of fact, I don't see it in the chat. What the? I guess we got a random sneaky donation from somebody, but you know what? I'm not going to complain. Thank you very much for whoever it was that dropped that in. I really, truthfully can't see where it is that came from, but thank you kindly to whoever that was. I'm sure you know who you are. I'm sure you'll rewatch this at a later date and time. But yep. Here's my good old cheat sheet. We have a lot to talk about tonight. Lots to talk about tonight. And the reason I made a cheat sheet is, number one, to keep us on track. And number two, backup. Backup for you know what. I'm sure you guys know what I'm talking about. So let's go ahead and say hello to a few folks before we really rock and roll. Twilight Firefly 100, Anjay Qualo, Super Charas, Amanda Kirby, Everyday Laguna Madre, Freezing, Super Charas, again, I think I already said that. Nova Viper Dwagon, Matt F150, what's up, buddy? Mick and Marley, Clara Okonma, Watchdog 2018, St. Lucia in the house. You guys are definitely going to have to be watching right out of the jump start. I got into another debate with somebody on X this time today, and it's just getting very out of hand. The trolls. I shared what is on the screen right here. Clearly, we all know what this is. This is National Hurricane Center's homepage, and what do you know? We have a new area of investigation with an 0 for 20 chance of development over the 48 and 7-day window. And, of course, somebody immediately took to my post because it was doing fairly well on the Twitter sphere, the X, and started talking about, I don't know what I'm saying, and I'm promoting misleading graphics. And in my mind, I'm thinking, so you're telling me that National Hurricane Center is misleading. That's what you're telling me here. And, I don't know. No ifs, ands, or buts. Anyways, let's see, who else do we have in the chat? Clara, Tamcam, Crizard, MRM, or Mr. Man J from Tobago, Chandler K, Friesen, Amanda Kirby, Kevin Rivera, Mike, good evening. Good to see you from New Orleans. Thank you very much for joining us, sir. Carolyn Wesby, good evening. Barbara, Daniel, Tam, Lorenzo, PM, let's do it. So now here it is. So this is exactly one of the features we're going to talk about tonight. Disturbance number one. It's not an invest area yet. It's an area for potential development. And as you can see, fairly low threat for folks west of where it currently is positioned. We have it wandering in towards northern South America, kind of affecting the coastlines of the Guianas, Venezuela, the Windward Islands, Trinidad, Tobago, further up towards the north. We're probably going to see impacts through Grenada, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, St. Lucia, Barbados could probably get some increased thunderstorm activity and some winds off of it. And the general takeaway is going to be anywhere between an additional inch, if not 2 inches of rainfall with this as it works its way through. Right now we're in the bit of what's called a diurnal minimum. So the thunderstorm activity is finally waning itself down. It's weakening as we speak. We're losing a lot of that very immense thunderstorm coverage, which is good news. It's weakening right on time. That's been kind of the case in point this entire hurricane season so far. The 3 weeks we've been rocking and rolling through it is the timing. It was looking very impressive at about the 55-degree west longitude line. As we approached that 60-degree line, that's when it finally started to lose a little bit of its luster. And on top of that, I am anticipating that if we continue to see the trends that we have been seeing, we're probably going to get another AOI out here. Just letting you guys know, another 0 for 20 possibly. I really think it's possible in the next 48 hours. Might not be tomorrow. It might be possibly Wednesday. We get that next AOI, but we're definitely seeing a strengthening signal that anywhere between a very, very organized tropical wave is going to move in like this, all the way up to, believe it or not, some of our lone outlier ensembles are going full-fledged hurricane with this. Now, don't be alarmed. I'm going to go ahead and put that out there right now before anybody comes for my head in the chat. I'm not saying we should prepare for a hurricane. It's just very weird to see that a lot of our ensembles, particularly our European ensembles, are going so intense with the strength of this feature. So let's go ahead and pass through. Let's go in, take a closer look. So across the spectrum right now, we're not looking too busy. We do have some active features out there in the MDR. We have a fairly decent convergence zone. We've always talked about that. You know exactly what that is, the ITCZ. Here's that wave, kind of getting that disturbance look to it. I'm not sure if you guys are seeing it, but there's a little bit of a kind of a low-pressure appendage there, and you could see that cyclonic curvature in the streamlines trying to pinch off, albeit it's going to see some land interaction. But there you have it. You're seeing the Windward Islands, as we've been talking about the last several streams on here. We're going to get some tropical impacts. Right now, it looks like through the overnight tonight or the overnight hours of tonight, it's not going to be that incredible. As it emerges on the opposite side, that remains to be seen. We'll have to see exactly what's left over on the backside. Then here comes the next wave. This might not be the one to do it. It might be the one just back behind it. And I want to try to maybe pull up cyclonic weather and take a look at the Africa satellite so you guys can see. And then this little area of disturbed weather down here is starting to pick up some mid-level vorticity with it as well. The European model off and on, as well as the Icon, have been thinking this could possibly try to move up towards the northeast like so. I'm not really thinking we're going to get tropical organization out of it. Some folks have mentioned tropical depression, tropical storm. It's another one of those situations we've learned our lesson a number of times that anything that comes out of here and moves this way, it just does not seem to be in the most favorable of setups to really get going. So I'm not paying too much attention to that. Could bring some extra rain and a little bit of winds for Bermuda alongside this frontal boundary that's coming down to the south. That's what's going to hook and grab it and push it off towards the northeast, give it that friendly cold frontal nudge, and that's going to be gone. And then Invest 93L is just rainfall shower activity for Mexico, and the remnants of Alberta are somewhere up here, if I'm not mistaken. This might be remnant Alberta, if not this little thing right here, little mid-level spin you can see in the satellite might be what's left of Alberta. So yeah, that's kind of more or less what we have going on out there. Here is a look at the water vapor, because there's been some very huge wide left and wide right swings across social media. And it's growing a bit tiresome that folks are trying to put a stamp on the overall weather pattern. The only person I've really seen over the last 24 hours kind of go one way or another with this is Mark Sutta from Hurricane Track, and I'm fully in agreement with what he had mentioned, that we're not too sure yet. It seems like the end of June into early July before things can really try to close down. We could see a little bit more tropical business out there. And I'm in full agreement with that because the ingredients are there. The upper and low level environment is definitely ready to rock and roll. We're looking at a couple of pivotal changes out there over the Atlantic Basin that could really shut things down, on top of our MJO finally getting up out of our AOR. But for the time being, we have nice amounts of moisture down there. You can see the dry air is not the worst. Definitely not the worst. And you can see that our Caribbean is definitely full of moisture. Tremendous amounts of moisture, in fact. We have lots of moisture all the way across the entirety of the Caribbean Sea. So for everybody out there who's getting excited about the Saharan dust, give it a little more time. We're not there yet. It is only June 24th, and a lot of our models are indicating that we'll get that really big push of Saharan air as we get into very end of June. We're talking like the last day or two, and then into the first couple weeks of July. And then after that, obviously, it's a toss-up. Speaking of Saharan air layer, you can see that a large majority of the extremely dry air is well to the north of our ITCZ. So obviously down here we have pretty good moisture anomalies. You can see that our waves are in fact surviving the trip across the MDR. So the Saharan dust and the dry air coming in around the backside of our Atlantic Ridge and off the coast of Africa is not truthfully ruining them altogether. And you can see obviously there's no dry air the further west you go. The Caribbean looks good, the Bahamas, the subtropics look okay, the Gulf of Mexico is still very moist. I'm also noticing a lot of different sources out there mentioning that the Gulf of Mexico has cooled dramatically. Well, yeah, no, of course, no poopies, because we just had a bunch of tropical rain showers and tropical storm Alberta and all that good jazz out there to help kind of create a little bit of that upwelling, cool us off with all the immense cloud cover and the rainfall that we had going on. As that begins to lift, we'll see it start to slowly incrementally rise again. So that's no harm, no foul there. Nothing really erroneous to report there. Here's a look at our 850 vorticity. As you can see, small little consolidation down there just to the south of the Florida Keys, south of Miami, Fort Lauderdale, pushing its way off of Cuba into the northern Bahamas. So just a little area to watch right there. That could also be what's helping to intensify our sea breeze and thunderstorm activity here in central Florida. Haven't gotten any rain out here, but if I'm not mistaken, I looked at the radar not too long ago, and I saw some pretty decent daytime thunderstorms firing over Florida. In fact, this looks like it could be a little latent. Aren't there thunderstorms out there right now going on in Florida? It doesn't look like there's very much on this satellite image. So now let's get right into it. Unfortunately, for some reason, Climate Prediction Center is not working. I can't seem to pull it up. I don't know why. I wanted to show you guys the MJO phasing and how we're going to transition out of where we are now over the next 2-ish or so weeks and move into that unfavorable zone. So I do think, even though there's some folks out there commenting and messaging me on social media saying, hey, you're wrong about there being activity through July, I'm not saying the entirety of July. I'm saying the first couple days. The first 3 to 5 days of July, I do think we are going to see some stuff going on, whether it be just more waves, amplified waves, some thunderstorms, or full-on tropical cyclogenesis. After that is when I do really believe for at least 2 weeks or so, give or take, we're going to see the tropics shut their doors and they're going to try to regroup. And the reason I say regroup is because we're already starting to see in our long-range vorticity and our velocity anomalies that right on cue, last week-ish or so of July into August, we're going to see conditions go right back up to favorable conditions over the Atlantic, the Caribbean, and Africa, as well as the Indian monsoon getting started, to re-intensify the action we get in our easterly waves, our tropical waves. And as we all know, once we hit the doors of August and we kick those doors in, anything's on. So these are the look at our latest ensembles from the European model at 12 Zulu today. You can see some small anomalies popping up right here, down here over the south where that vorticity is being ejected from Venezuela and Colombia. That's going to move across Central America into the Eastern Pacific. Not looking for that very much. Actually, you know what? I lied. No, I forgot that this is time-stamped up towards 72 and 48 hours. So actually, this is going to be our wave that's moving across the windwards in northern South America right now, moving up in that sort of fashion. Possibly going to be another Bach entity, Bay of Campeche, and that's going to crash into Mexico. This is the area that we really ought to be paying attention to, and what a lot of folks out there are finally picking up what the models are putting down. You can see that now, according to the European ensembles, we are up just above that 50 percentile for potential development. So getting very interesting. This is probably the greatest increase in our overall projected developmental possibilities or just favorability altogether since this became a little area to investigate. And like I've been saying this entire time, even though folks get mad and say I'm hyping, there it is. Lesser Antilles are entirely blanketed by all these probabilities, whether it be a wave or anything tropically trying to develop. You guys are going to be front and center, and then from there you can see a huge anomaly of whether or not we're going to continue off towards the west or cut out or dip out, like I said on TikTok, straight out into open sea because of a weakness that we're going to get in our ridge thanks to a trough coming off of North America. What's very interesting is if you look at the 12Z ensembles from the Euro, like I had mentioned earlier, there goes that initial development sometime right around the tail end of the month. So somewhere between June 27th and June 28th. Not a tremendous amount of ensemble support out there for the Western Caribbean, the Southern Bay of Campeche, but we'll continue to monitor our other models, and our other ensembles are feeling it a little more than the Euro. And what's ironic is the Euro is feeling a little bit more of the MDR as opposed to the Gulf of Mexico. So again, all of our ensembles minus a select few, like I said at the very beginning, disclaimer, I'm not saying prepare for a hurricane, but I'm saying it's very interesting that if you look, there's a couple of outlier ensembles here that do miss the Lesser Antilles, the Leeward Islands particularly, but there is one member that goes down to 960 to 979, and another one, this one here that's a little further to the left, goes all the way down to Cat 3 strength. So really interesting to see that the Euro of all models is thinking that. Then you can see the general thinking is if this stays weak, it's going to track off generally to the west-northwest. So Leeward, Windward Islands, regardless, you're going to have to pay attention. Then it's a bit of a toss-up. U.S., British Virgin Islands, and Puerto Rico, whatever this thing is, we are not going to try to classify it this far out. In fact, to tell you the bold truth, guys, with as much of an emotional roller coaster that this hurricane season has been so far, I would not not be surprised if at 0Z all this stuff goes way down again. There's been a lot of dramatic well, I won't say dramatic fluctuations, but there have been some pretty wide swings on the European model specifically. Believe it or not, the GFS has been a little bit more consistent with this scenario than the Euro has been. Today we're seeing even the operational model, which I have pulled up a couple more slides from now. I'll show you guys. The Euro is going for full-on tropical development. So you can see you go even further through time, and that's where it gets a little bit more interesting. We're like kind of splitting the difference, a nice little fork in the road. Some ensemble members want to take it generally up towards the north, following that 60-degree west, following a trend that we saw with Tammy, with Philippe, we saw with Lee last year, and we saw with Nigel last year. But then you have some of these ensemble outliers that continue to move through and actually put Florida and the Bahamas into the cone of uncertainty, more or less. And what's very interesting is, once again, if you look, this is a hurricane member, this is a hurricane member, this is a borderline hurricane member, and this member right here is sub 950 millibars. Definitely an outlier, very low confidence on that, but that is wild that of all models, the European ensembles are saying, yes, there is one likely outcome to where there could be a Category 4 just whacking the living daylights out of eastern Florida. All right, let's not go too far there, PM. I'm not going to say that the Euro is over-intensifying it and the American is better, because we know the GFS is also its own little dipsy-doo-dah ways. I just do think that some of these intense ensembles here are a bit of an outlier. You come over to the easterly wave chart here, and I'll zoom it in just a little bit. I'll make it a little bigger so you guys in the chat can see it. And the reason I like to pull this up in reference to what we saw there on weather models is this kind of takes away that pressure bias. So on here, if you look, the signal doesn't look all that amazing. It does, but it doesn't. We have a decent handful, probably about a quarter of our ensembles, more than a fifth. We have about 1/4 now, 25% of our ensembles, maybe about, 30%. I'm not going to count all the spaghetti plots here, but we have a bias here. We tend to omit the 1005 and greater from this. And if you come over to our easterly wave, it unbiases that, and you can see all the different ensemble members calling for some sort of an entity to move through. And again, like I've been saying, y'all can come at me and try to get all upset and whatnot. I'm not paying attention anymore, but the Lesser Antilles need to pay some sort of attention to what's going on to your east, because something may be rolling in there. And even on here, you can see the color coding for some of our stronger ensembles pulling it to the north. As weird as that may sound, the stronger the better, because it'll find that weakness a little bit faster. There's a trough right in through there with our anticyclone over the eastern Atlantic, and then a ridge that continues to manifest itself over the southeast and central portions of CONUS. So there is going to be a bit of a time frame for this thing to sneak up towards the north and escape. We need it to be stronger. If it's not stronger, it's going to keep moving west. It's not going to have that tug and pull effect. Here's a look at the GFS ensembles. The GFS ensembles keep this thing as a tropical storm, if not a very low-end hurricane. Same general thinking, though. The Lesser Antilles have something maybe to investigate off towards their east as this thing comes in shortly towards the turn of the month. And then we split the difference. Some of the GFS ensembles keep it going west into the Gulf of Mexico. I really don't see that happening, to tell you the truth. Others want to take it up towards the northeast, head it up towards Bermuda, and then eventually out to sea. The reason I don't see that happening out here over the Caribbean is we're just still in too harsh of an environment. We have a lot of shear that's still going to be in place, even though we have the moisture and obviously the ocean temps, the heat content and whatnot. But we're just climatologically speaking, we don't have the phasing going on right now. We're still, and I can show you the shear tendencies as well for that general area. If we switch over and actually we'll just go to the parameter and we'll take a look at the wind shear. Deep layer wind shear, and we'll use the Euro for, as a matter of fact, and we'll go to the tropical Atlantic. This only goes out 240. What the heck? I wanted tropical Atlantic, not the MD. There we go. You go through time, and you can see out there over the MDR, we lose a lot of our shear. A lot of the shear is gone, but then out there over the Caribbean, if you notice, we're still getting a little bit of a wraparound effect by that that trough out there. So if it were to continue to bomb out towards the west, it's going to run headfirst not only into our intensifying trade winds in the mid-levels, but we have that westerly component to our upper-level wind shear between 500 and 300 millibars. But there you go. I kind of just ruined the suspense. If we switch over to the European model, there you go. I'll get us a little closer so you can see. We'll go to the tropical Atlantic. And there you have it. This is, as everyone would say, King Euro. Everybody says, you know, if it ain't on a Euro, it ain't happening. We've said that a bunch of times on this channel, and there it is. I don't know what changed, but 12Z iteration is thinking we're going to see some sort of cyclogenesis at the start of July, and then it's going to move right in and potentially impact our Leeward Islands, come dangerously close to the U.S. British Virgin Islands, and stay to the north of Puerto Rico, to where Puerto Rico, even as a low-end, mid-grade tropical storm, you're barely going to see anything on it. That's the thing. So here, if this were, let's say hypothetically, if this were to play out, because I know the question is going to be asked, this is definitely going to be pretty intense in terms of rainfall for our Leeward Islands, regardless, for sure. You click a little bit forward in time right here, and you could see even though the Euro thinks it could potentially be strengthening, we are now on the southern side of the storm, so we will not see as hellacious of impacts for our our western Leeward Islands. U.S. British Virgin Islands will get some rainfall, and same with Puerto Rico, but you will be on the weaker side of the system. And again, I got to throw the disclaimer out there, if this one particular model run were to verify, because I know you guys are going to ask the question, what'll happen if this happens? Well, if this happens, that's what to expect. It'll be, unfortunately, places like Antigua, Guadeloupe, Barbuda, Anguilla, who could see some more intense tropical storm impacts. But then as soon as that thing gets to the north of our islands, you're going to be on the south side of it, and it'll be much weaker in terms of effects. So that's the good news, if this plays out. And you can see as we get towards the 4th of July for us here in the United States, it is well to the north on this current model run. I feel so bad saying that because I feel like I'm insulting you guys' intelligence, but I've been hearing from critics and criticism out there. You got to spell it out for everybody. So this is one model run, one potential solution, and if this potential solution were to unfold, those are the impacts we're looking at. Obviously, if this thing doesn't form, you're going to see different impacts. If this thing goes up towards the north as a stronger system, sure, it's stronger, but you're not going to see any impacts. If this thing does try to develop onto one of the weaker ensemble solutions where it stays a tropical depression, tropical storm, low-end storm, and moves in like this, impacts are going to change. We have to make sure to pay attention to not only our operational models, but also our ensembles. I did notice on here, this has been very interesting. So the operational GFS does not like this system. It doesn't like it at all. You can see on our 12Z model run, we do get cyclogenesis down there, right there. You can see a very weak system, but then immediately shortly after that, the GFS loses faith in it. Same general track as the European and the Canadian model, but dissipates completely. This is another version of that solution. So again, we're going to see some increased rainfall, probably some winds and some lightning, but nothing too intense that we can't handle out there, especially after riding out the last hurricane season and even seasons before that. If you come over to our precipitable water anomaly, where did it go? Right here. This is our GEFS control member of the ensembles for the GFS. Night and day difference. So if you look, first and foremost, we are looking for possible development out there in the Bay of Campeche. Right there, you can see that first wave moving in. Here, you can see it in our precipitable water anomalies, an increase of showers and storms pushing up like that, so some possible development there. But then if you look at the control member of the GFS for that second system back there over the MDR, there goes cyclogenesis right there. And this is a totally different solution. This has what could be some sort of an organized low pressure moving right through the Lesser Antilles, and then eventually getting scooped up by that weakness in the ridge, and then being nudged back towards the west again as that ridge builds back in. So this is going to be a tricky forecast. Tricky in the sense of we might not get anything. There's a lot of folks out there who are adamant that there's nothing going to happen. We have an area of interest, that's going to bust. We have dry air out there, everything's going to bust, nothing's going to happen. But the signals are so mixed. It's a mixed bag of signals. The confidence is there right now, but there are so many swings to the left, so many swings to the right. You could see that our GFS ensembles here, if I switch back over to those bad boys real fast, if I can hurry up. If we switch back over to the GFS ensembles, there we go. you can see the general consensus is it will continue to move west-northwest. Not nearly as many ensembles as the European model. Granted, these are weaker ensembles, pulling it to the north. So the GFS members are thinking this thing's going to travel west-northwest, kind of like what we've been discussing on here. And then once we get to that 70-degree latitude or longitude line, that's when it could start to pull to the north. So the ensembles and the control member of our ensembles is in line with that. And this isn't the only model run that it does that. If you go back to 6Z earlier today, you can see the same thing. Cyclogenesis down there, and then it moves through the Caribbean, but then it crashes ashore through Central America. You go back to 0Z, you can kind of more or less see the same thing. Cyclogenesis right there off the leeward right there, coming in, moves into the Caribbean, and actually blows up into something else and becomes a problem for Texas. So the thinking is there. The timing and the weirdness of our upper level pattern is what's making it extremely difficult. And that leads me right into our 200 millibar control member here off the European model. So this is our 12Z EPS 200 millibar wind control. And the reason I bring this up is I want us to take a look at a couple of different things. First and foremost, as we get close to that pivotal point in time where we can see cyclogenesis, this is the start of the calendar on the 30th of June, the last day of the month. And as you can see here, over the greater MDR, we have really good anticyclonic action. We have excellent difluent flow in the streamlines here, right over our intertropical convergence zone. So excellent conditions. Excellent conditions. There's a nice little anticyclone keeping the shear at bay, keeping a lot of the excess inhibitors to the north. But then it becomes the game of, we have a tut out here still. We have a trough. We have a trough out there that the European ensembles are thinking should retreat fast enough. Right there, you can see that turn in the winds gets picked back up by our main pattern and becomes a lot more low amplitude, so that should reduce the shear as whatever the heck happens down there continues to move off towards the west-northwest. But then as you go even further through time, here comes another trough. So it's going to be very tricky, very tricky. The timing on this is going to have to be impeccable for us to get one of those solutions to where we have a strong system out there. I don't think that's a realistic ceiling to put out to you guys, but the potential is there. Otherwise, our ensembles would not be picking that up. And what that means is there's a low confidence that that could be our solution, but the potential does exist. Otherwise, our ensemble members would not show it. That's the thing you guys got to remember, okay? The operational models are very different from our ensembles. The ensembles are exploring every bit of nook and cranny in the atmosphere, from the surface all the way up to almost space. Obviously, I know that the troposphere is the top of the weather atmosphere, but you know what I'm talking about. It's going through every piece of the puzzle, every microscopic aspect of a forecast, and generating what that member thinks is the most likely outcome. So whenever you see those stronger or weaker ensembles, that one member of a team, we have 287 people in the chat, one person of this chat right now is going to say category 4 moving up into the Atlantic because that seems reasonable from what they speculated. When you don't have very many of them agreeing that that's the most likely outcome, then obviously confidence is low, but the potential is there, just very low end. Operational models, on the other hand, have no thinking element to them, as weird as that may sound. Operational models are valid for that one point in time. They get activated for that one point in time, and then they run wild, and that's it. It just comes out with its own solution for the X amount of hours that the panels run through. That's why whenever we see our ensemble members thinking like this for the European ensemble computer model, and then you switch over to our operational model and we're seeing the same thing, that's a pretty decent signal that confidence is there. Problem is, we've all seen it time and time again where the European model gets excited at 12 Zulu and then at 0Z, nothing. So I'm not really, I'm not holding my breath that this is going to be the end-all, be-all. I definitely want to see more. We're far enough in time to where we can see more. If you look, this is valid for 12Z on July 4th. It is only June 24th, so we have 10 days before anything comes creeping up on our Lesser Antilles. I'll say about 7 to 8 days. I'll say 7 to 8 days because obviously if you go back in time, we're already starting to feel impacts as early as July 3rd. So we'll say 7 to 8 days before something is off to your east, maybe sneaking up on you one way or another. So I want to see more. I want to see more consistent model runs showing potential development. I don't want to wake up tomorrow morning looking like this at my phone, laying in bed at 5 a.m., and all I see is rain showers. I don't want to see that because then my confidence is going to go way down and I'm going to feel silly even broadcasting this stuff to you guys. And that's already happened a couple times this hurricane season, I'll be honest. So playing the timing game is going to be key here. If you look here as well on the ensembles for moisture, you notice we don't get that significant plume to more or less shut everything down until after our systems can move off towards the west. So here is that area. You can see a slightly deepening of the shade of green here. That would indicate where our wave is, our potential wave, potential disturbance is moving through. And you can see in terms of timing and beating that dusty air coming off of Africa, it wins the race. And the reason I think we're going to see such a hellacious outbreak is if you look down at the surface here, our thermal low out there over the Saharan desert is in full effect. Strong, dominant western phase of our Saharan heat low, the SHL. And then on top of that, if you look at our Azores high, our ridge, it's also moving off towards the east just a little bit more. So what that's going to do, and I forget who it was that asked, but to give you a bit of insight on what pressure gradient, contour gradient is, it simply means the difference in temperature from one object or one feature to another. These black lines moving through show the gradient. So what this tells me is pressure is getting higher as you get closer to the high pressure. Pressure is getting lower as you get closer to this low pressure center. And where you see these black lines, that indicates that you're stepping towards higher pressure or stepping towards lower pressure. And the gradient itself would be parallel to these lines. So as you get towards higher pressure, obviously, or lower pressure, in between, you're going to have the winds flowing through, indicating the circulation around the two. So in terms of winning the race against the shutdown is what we'll call it, the tropical shutdown, instead of the government shutdown, the tropical shutdown, it wins. Our wave is up here. You can see all that enhanced precip activity. There goes that main plume of what could close the tropics down for a couple weeks. From there, it becomes a bit more of a toss-up because if you notice, there's the very, very subtle weakness in our ridge. It's not the most impressive. It's right there. Where that dry air is, there's a bit of a frontal boundary, a bit of a mid to upper level trough that's moving through, but then look over the southeast United States. Strong extension of our Atlantic high. So I do believe that's why if we come back over to the Euro ensembles, I do believe that's why we genuinely have a huge fork in the road. And it's as definitive of a fork in the road as possibly could be, because you can see there's a general trend there, and there's a general trend here. It's not like we're looking at one giant fan of ensembles like this. You know, there's a clustering here, and then there's a clustering here. So even the models are not the models, excuse me, but the ensemble members are thinking, well, the timing is going to be critical for it to make that loophole and shoot out. The timing is going to be critical in terms of if it wants to slow itself down or even move a little bit faster, it won't catch that breakdown fast enough, and we could see something sneaking through the Caribbean or the Greater Antilles. So it's a toss-up. It's a tricky forecast, and I'm not going to lie to you guys. You come here, and you can see even on the mean sea level pressure anomaly, and I'll show you the 500 millibar heights. Right there is our weak spot. There it is, and you can see that that's a small weak spot. It's not the biggest. If you look at the timing, this is July 2nd. You can see our little feature right here in the anomaly starting to show itself on that point in the chart. Extremely dominant Azores high right there, for sure, extending off towards the west. This is our weakness. So again, if it can move slow enough, it'll get picked up, and if it'll intensify enough, it'll get picked up. But then hot on the trail of that weak trough, if you look over the northeast, bam, high pressure comes back in and reinforces it. And what that does is it kind of closes up and blocks it back down towards the south. You can see our ensemble right there. And at this point in time, we're losing that weakness. So it's going to be a tricky forecast. I'm not going to lie to you guys. A lot of it is going to be timing, and then we're looking at the progression of what looks to be maybe a stronger trough that could try to work its way in, but by then, we're already seeing this high pressure building back in. You can see in the gradient pattern here, it's already smushing back in across the central and western Atlantic. So we'll definitely have to see. If you go up to our 500 millibar anomalies as well, you can see that the ridge does come back into place. Our tut is there. There's the trough that wants to catch it, and then very quickly it washes itself out, becomes very low amplitude, and we get our ridging to build back in. So it's going to have a small window to escape. But it is possible. The stronger it gets, the easier it will be to escape. If you notice on the GFS does not want to develop it, but on the same token, the GFS keeps our Atlantic high in place. So double-edged sword. GFS does not develop it, but continues on that west-northwest push towards the Bahamas and towards the southeast. So it's a give and take with this setup. It's a big give and take. I'll show you the Canadian model really quickly because I haven't shown that at all, but you can see that the Canadian model is also thinking that right on cue with the European model. In fact, I want to see how well the run-to or model-to-model consistency is if I switch to the Euro. Oh yeah, look at that. So excellent model-to-model verification there. If I switch between the two models, same low pressure, nearly the same identical spot at the same valid time. Let's go back to July 2nd at 0Z. Where we see that initial development, and let's switch between the two models. There's our Canadian. Yeah, and the European has it. So not 100% agreement, not tremendous agreement, not 100% confidence, but the confidence is there. The GFS does, you can make a case that the GFS does have it, but doesn't hold it together. It's right there on the GFS. So our main models are definitely picking it up, but like I said, for some reason, the 12Z GFS just does not like it too much, and I want to know why that is. I wonder why that is. It could be the dry air. It looks like on the GFS, that dry air bias is what's getting us. The GFS naturally has a tendency to increase our dry air out there. If we switch over to the European model, I'm sure there's a big difference. Yeah, more robust wave coming up and punching through that dry air. Still down there, but not as much aggravation from it, whereas the GFS, I'm sure there's a couple of other finite variables down there that stop it from really getting going. What does the shear look like? Yeah, there's also a little bit more wind shear. That tut stays around a little bit longer. You can see the tut right in through here, plain as day. The tut stays out there. The trough over the central and northern Atlantic stays in, and that squashes it. Bet you the Euro does not have that the Euro does not have that nearly as much. Euro weakens the trough out there. In fact, the trough isn't even there. We do have some westerly wind shear, but... So, yeah, I don't know. It's definitely going to be a tricky forecast. But that's all I got. So, that's pretty much it. Oh, yeah, forgive me. I'm sorry. If we go back to, say, for instance, the GFS for 12 Zulu, you can see that we are still thinking that something's going to try to form itself up out there over the Bay of Campeche, albeit very weak from that system that's out there that's being highlighted right now. Same thing with the Canadian model. The Canadian model is thinking we could see an Alberto 2.0, a 93L 2.0. I believe the Icon also has it on there at 12Z, or it's on 18Z as well. Very weak, just a bunch of showers and storms moving its way through Central America, too much land interaction. If we get a little closer and switch over to our 12Z, see a little bit further in time, the Icon does have something down there, although it kind of shows itself a little bit more so down there in the Eastern Pacific. I'm not quite sure if that's actually what's going to take place. We would need it to go way further to the south for it to cross AORs, and the Eastern Pacific has just been kind of a dead stick. We haven't really seen very much going on. The AI European model is showing it as well at 12 Zulu. If you look, there goes that first system right there into the BOC, and then right around July 2nd, July 3rd, here comes that next one right there. Not organizing it, but definitely brings in a mess of showers and storms to the Lesser Antilles. Which is weird because, truthfully, it was the European AI model that had it developing. And, in fact, it looks like the AI model wants to follow the track of what that controlled GEFS model did. There goes a piece of it and then another piece of it that continues westward through the Caribbean and then blasts Central America head on. Yeah, it could. It definitely could. I mean, I'm not really seeing too much of that in our ensembles. If you look, our ensembles keep that thing fairly nestled down towards the south. could try to stay over open water for a little bit longer. And I know previous model runs did have some indication that it could try to sneak into the Gulf of Mexico. We're not seeing too much agreement in that department right now. If I switch over to our ensembles of the GEPS, I'm pretty sure that the Canadian ensembles also show that potential of it squeaking through, developing down there in the Central Caribbean, and then continuing on through the Yucatan Channel towards Texas and northern Mexico. And then here comes that next one. You can see the Canadian ensembles not really highlighting it, not hyping it up as much, but the Canadian ensembles do carry it through the Lesser Antilles and into the Caribbean. And then from there, it begins to start pulling towards the north right there. You can see a couple of ensemble members carrying it through Caymans, Cuba, others keeping it to the north of our Greater Antilles through the Bahamas. So, same general thinking-ish, but we'll have to wait and see. Again, it's going to be very tricky. And then just to show you guys, I know that this is the GEFS long range, so take it with a grain of salt. But if I switch back to 0Z yesterday, you can see that for a while there, the tropical Atlantic just shuts down. See that? Not a single member out there all the way through towards the back end of July. There's our system right there. First couple of iterations, you can see some of it makes it down into the Gulf. Others want to circulate out to sea like I showed you earlier. Those systems lift through, and then boom, from about second week of July all the way through. Not a single ensemble member out there. So again, for the folks who are telling me that, you're wrong, it's shutting down, it is going to shut down. But we're not there yet. We still have a little bit more time to marinate on these couple of disturbances, and then we'll see our unfavorable MJO phase set up over the Maritimes, over Western Pacific. We'll get a lot of that subsidizing air or sinking air, downward vertical velocities. Our dry air will kick up. And I think this is going to change. I really do think that we're not going to see unfavorable conditions all the way through to August. I think as we get towards the very tail end of July, last week and a half to last week of July is when things are going to finally wake back up and the tropics are going to open their doors, and we're going to see what the 2024 hurricane season is all about. You could see it here, right there. In fact, this is an even greater uptrend. This is bigger than what I saw earlier. This must have updated later in the day because that's even bigger than I saw earlier. So as you can see, right on cue, there's still a favorable signal as we round out the end of June and into early July. And like we've been saying, from about just after the 4th of July holiday, we're closing up business for a little while. And then there you go, right there. Extremely favorable conditions setting up with very, very favorable conditions over Africa. So that could be a taste of what the 2024 hurricane season is all about. Once we battle through all the folks trying to cancel the hurricane season, all the folks still hyping the hurricane season, and all the folks trying to gravitate and latch on to something to keep themselves relevant, it's going to be quiet for a little bit. We're going to just kind of have to grin and bear and see what's up Mother Nature's sleeve as we get closer in time. Is this the time of season for homebrewed Gulf pop-up storms? I'm having flashbacks of Cindy in 2005. It is, but right now we just don't have those ingredients coming together. You need something to either plop off the United States for that to take place, Mike, or you need a very, very weak wave or disturbance to wander its way up to the Gulf and begin to manifest itself in the right conditions. Right now, that's not going to be the case, so I would definitely not worry about it. Daniel Lawson, you are correct. In 2004, we didn't get jack of anything until the very tail end of July into early August. That's when the hurricane season started to kick off. And in fact, if I'm not mistaken, 2004... we didn't even have an A storm. At least in 2024, we've gotten our A storm off the list, and we have a couple of other opportunities to pop off a B and a C maybe. In 2004, we didn't get jack until very end of July. We finally had Tropical Storm Alex. And then finally, that's when we had Bonnie, Charlie, I think it was Earl that year. Earl came after that. Francis, we all know and love. Francis, Ivan, we all know. I forget the H storm that year, but then we had Hurricane Jean. So, yeah, I'm really thinking that 2004 should really begin our big officials out there, NOAA, CSU, Hurricane Center, should really start to consider 2004 a potential analog, because we're still not seeing any change here. In fact, CPC finally updated their ENSO outlook, and they have us as neutral can be. I think CPC has us either at like a plus 0.3, if not a plus 0. So we are as neutral pattern could be out there. And I think that's also what's keeping things very slow. Kevin Rivera, definitely, I agree. We have 347 people watching, almost 3,000 overall views. We got to give that like button a little nudge. Could we please give that like button just a subtle nudge? Give it like a fist bump or something like that. I would love that. 2017, JJ614. I got to do a little more research, but I do agree 2017 could potentially be another analog, and I know a few folks in my tropical chat have also discussed that as well. My mind over your matter. I'm not trying to say that a Hurricane Andrew is possible, but I can see a Hurricane Andrew style track being a thing this year. And in fact, if you look, a lot of these ensemble members here do in fact kind of take on very reminiscent of a Hurricane Andrew, a Hurricane Francis, a Hurricane, I'm not going to say Gene, Hurricane Maria kind of ish. What was Maria's track? I don't remember full-heartedly. Whoops, not Goofgle. Oh, that was 2017. So yeah, a little bit of like a Hurricane Maria path. I'm kind of seeing that in the ensemble members. So that's definitely not out of the realm of possibility. And when I say those kind of tracks, guys, I'll use a static map here. I'll use this map and I'll turn the Can I turn the ensembles off? Let's go to a weak ensemble run. There we go. When I say a Hurricane Andrew, Hurricane Maria style track, what I mean by that is something coming in, kind of skirting to the north, and then kind of just keep going like this. Because we've had some very anomalous ridging over the Atlantic and up over the Northeast. We've had that blocker in place. So again, it's a big game of timing, and I could definitely see there being a case in point where we have something in the long term come in and then try to make a run for it and then bloop back off towards the west. There's definitely going to be a number of instances where that stuff can just get kicked out to sea. But I can definitely see east coast of Florida being, an issue, a struggle point, a point of contention. Nazario, in your opinion, do you think the wave would make a westwardly track or strengthen to move northward? Well, we're too far out to see, Mr. Man J. We got to get a little more ensemble and model confidence. That's the problem. We're starting to see our operational models catching up with what the ensembles have been highlighting for us, which is a good step towards an optimal forecast. It's not, as some meteorologists would call, a slam dunk forecast, but it's a forecast that is building momentum. We're slowly seeing the puzzle pieces together. If we wake up tomorrow and I see 0Z completely squashes it, we're back to the drawing board. So right now it's a little too early, Mr. Man J, to kind of call that. South Florida, I do believe, can get hit. Definitely. South Florida, I definitely can see them getting hit, whether it be sometime later in the season with something coming up out of the west or something trying to make its way across the MDR and up out of the east. I can definitely see South Florida being a potential impact zone. I can. And that's just based off of what we've seen so far. Obviously, there's going to be more changes, but based off of how strong our ridging has been, if you guys think about it, since the start of the hurricane season, everything has kind of just done this. Hasn't even gotten into the Caribbean, hasn't gotten towards Florida, hasn't gotten out into the Atlantic. It's just been a strong ridge across the Atlantic, just driving everything west, driving everything through the Bac, into Mexico, into Central America. Typically what happens is we go from a dominating ridge pattern to something like this, as we go through August, September, and October. So that's why I'm still thinking, I'm digging my heels in. Mid-Atlantic to Florida and the eastern Gulf of Mexico coastline is going to be a spot to really monitor as we go through August, especially August, and then September, October. Truthfully, Scott, to answer your question, either side of Florida is the bad side to get hit, and that boils down to the geography of Florida. I use Hurricane Charlie and Hurricane Ian as a comparison all the time for this. If you think about Hurricane Ian, massive, strong, monster of a storm, made landfall and absolutely destroyed Fort Myers, Charlotte Harbor, 15-foot storm surge, 150 plus mile an hour winds, but then by the time we felt it in Central Florida, it was we got a lot of rain and some tropical storm force winds. That's because of how slow it moved and the angle that it took. As it made landfall, it hooked even sharper to the east and just kind of marinated over interior Florida before exiting back off our east coast. Charlie, on the other hand, my home dog out there from '04 that really inspired me to fully dive into weather, Charlie came on exact same spot, same intensity of winds, but we didn't have as much storm surge. We had just as much wind impacts, but then it was night and day difference what we felt here in the greater Orlando area and up to the northeast because of how fast it moved. So worst case scenario, either side. Either side. It's just going to come down to the variables of the angle and how fast it's moving. If it's coming up like an Irma, going up the heart of the peninsula from the south to the north, moving fairly slow, it's going to die out very quickly. If it's coming in at like a 45-degree angle like we've seen with East Coast and West Coast storms, and it's moving fast, it's going to change the name of the game. So it's very iffy because of the natural geometry and geography of Florida. Other places don't have that luxury. Everybody else has one coastline. If you look, everybody else has one coastline, so it can only come in at one angle. On Florida, if it comes in like this, if it comes in like this, if it decides to come in like this, if it comes in like this, if it comes up like this, I mean, we can get attacked from all sides, and that's what makes Florida very interesting. Bermuda's doing okay right now, Jane. Thank you for tuning in. Bermuda, we're not seeing too much. You can see that there are a couple of ensemble members on our most recent EPS or European ensemble run, trying to bring some kind of weak area of low pressure up your way, but nothing to be overly concerned about. Long term, our models are thinking that whatever happens down here might try to swing your way, but we're still investigating. And in fact, a lot of our ensembles don't take it towards you in Bermuda, so you're in good shape right now. You're definitely in good shape. But all right, guys, it is 8:50 in the evening. We're going to go ahead and start winding down the live stream. Thank you very much for such a tremendous turnout. If you're still in the chat and haven't done so already, it would mean so much to us and the rest of the Weather Center community if you can give that like button a friendly little nudge. Consider joining the community, hitting that subscribe button, making sure your notifications are turned on. We have about another week-ish to talk tropics and really delve into what's coming if we do get a storm to round out this period of activity before we quiet down for a while. Yeah, I definitely would recommend tuning back in, asking questions, throwing your comments and concerns at me. I'm happy to answer you. You can ask any of my long-term followers as well. I would imagine we have a lot of new viewers in here tonight. I always make it a point to respond to you guys. In fact, sometimes I feel bad because I know you're just looking for a cut and dried response, but I'll go in there on my keypad or my keyboard and I'll write a whole synopsis and explain to you what I'm thinking just to try to answer your question. Houston's looking pretty good for July 1st. In fact, because of that dry, dusty air, one positive side to that dry air that's going to try to build in, I'll bring us over to the NASA dust. I don't know why it's not uploading. It's not, we don't have any of the latest models. If I go back to the 21st and we can see it, you can see that even with the dust, the NASA model is thinking something's going to try to spin right there, and that actually lines up perfectly with what the other models are thinking. Whoops, let me use a color that actually populates. We're seeing a little bit of spin in the dust out there, so even our NASA model, albeit this is a dust model, is showing some sort of spin in the dust signature, so that's interesting. But anyways, one positive to the dusty air is if you look at the time frame, July 1st, we're going to have dust coming into the southeast, the southern plains, the Gulf Coast. It'll help to ramp up our sunsets a little bit, give us some more photogenic sunsets out there. And if it hangs out long enough, it'll probably help keep things nice and clear and hot for the 4th of July for my barbecue and water park, ocean, beach fans, fishing fans, you name it. So that's one little bit of positivity we can draw from the dust. If you suffer from allergies, that might not be the greatest because allergies are probably going to go way up. Hay fever, the pollen count, as well as the dust adding to it is probably going to impact your sinuses. But, with all things weather, it's a give and take. What's the CFS looking like? We'll blast through the CFS. The CFS kind of, if I'm not mistaken, shows what we've been discussing. The CFS shows that feature moving up towards the Bach, and then that other system right there getting ready to pull up. There it goes. CFS showing right here that there's some kind of weak system moving through the greater Antilles. Makes a close pass to the Bahamas and actually does get shoved into Florida. You see that? Now, take the CFS with a grain of salt. Obviously, you don't want to use the CFS to forecast, but the general thinking, the overall pattern is definitely there. And then same thing with the CFS. If you look out there over the MDR and over the Caribbean, it's going to quiet down. This is now July 8th. Quiet period, very quiet period. But I did notice this on the CFS at 0Z. If you watch as it gets towards the very tail end of July, we start seeing a large influx of activity. We start seeing more lowering pressure in the Caribbean, and we start seeing lower pressure coming off of Africa. So the CFS is definitely picking up the overall consensus of what might be lurking out there. The 0Z was a little bit more doom and gloom. If you go all the way towards the back end and you look at the end of July, look at that. You go towards the end of July and bam, 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 lots of increase in activity. As you get towards that last week and a half, last week of July, we start seeing them coming off. So if you guys are hoping for some big storms, if you're hoping for the numbers, if you're hoping for the ace, just give it a little time. Let's just give it a little time. But yeah, that's all she wrote, folks. If you do have any additional questions, comments, or concerns, drop them in the comments section down below, or drop me a line on my private my other social medias, my Instagram, my TikTok, and my X. Happy to get back to you always. I make it a point to respond to everybody, regardless of the question or the comment or the concern. You'll always get a response from me. I hope New York City does not get a landfall. That's going to be a tough forecast as well, but I would say it's not out of the realm of possibility. You see the CFS trying to take some fish storms up in that direction, so we'll just have to take it on a case-by-case basis. I definitely do not see anything in the immediate future. That is for certain. I have a 0%. In fact, I'd give it a negative chance if I could of anything sneaking up the eastern seaboard. I don't see it. But alrighty, folks, that's all she wrote. We'll see you again possibly tomorrow. I know we have a lot to talk about, but I also have a lot of schoolwork that I'm working on behind the scenes on top of a bunch of other things. So let's play tomorrow by ear. If I wake up and I see some really big signal... Oh, okay, there we go. I don't know why everything disconnected for a second. If there's some big up-and-comings as we go through 12Z, I'm lagging. What's happening? Oh, there we go. Okay, now I'm back. We'll see. We'll just play it by ear. Let's put it that way before YouTube kicks me out. Thank you all very much for watching tonight. You've been a wonderful audience. Thank you for whoever dropped in the $5 donation. I didn't catch you in the chat. I didn't see it pop up. It didn't give me a notification. Maybe it was much earlier in the day and it disappeared. I couldn't see who you are, but regardless, I see you. Thank you extra. I'm losing my train of thought. I'm losing my words. So we'll see you all again very soon. Until next time, this is Weather Center Nazario signing out.